Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel, Histories of Airliners. Today we're taking a trip around the United States to see some of the most iconic aircraft ever built, the Boeing KC-135 Stratotanker and its derivatives, all stemming from the Boeing Model 367-80 and the related Boeing 707. From its humble beginnings as a military transport to its diverse roles in mostly military aviation, the C-135 has left an undeniable mark in history. And today we're going to see where you can find some of these amazing machines on display for all to admire. The KC-135 was developed when the need for a jet-powered mid-air refueler became apparent in the 1950s. Jet-powered bombers like the Boeing B-47 and the Boeing B-52 were flying at near stall speeds, flying behind aging KC-97 stratofreighters that were flying with their engines to the stops. Initially, Lockheed won the contract to build this new jet-powered mid-air refueler with its L-193 Constellation II design. However, to bridge the gap, Boeing showed that it could build the KC-135s in 2 years less time, and so 200 KC-135s were ordered, and eventually the Lockheed design was never built, and around 600 more KC-135s were built, which in turn led to the development of the rest of the KC-135 family. Museum-displayed KC-135s and variants are mostly displayed outdoors with one exception, due to their size. As far as I've been able to tell, every KC-135 and/or variant are displayed only in the United States. If I am incorrect in this, please let me know in the comments. Starting at the National Museum of the United States Air Force, this iconic museum in Dayton, Ohio, is home to the following KC-135 family members. Airframe 60-0329er is on display outdoors at the Air Force Museum, sitting across Spat Street from the main parking lot. It was a KC-135 stationed during the 1990s at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam with the 203rd Air Refueling Squadron of the Hawaii Air National Guard. This aircraft has had F-108 high-bypass engines since 1986. These engines are the military designation for the civilian CF-56 engines found in many airliners today. Sitting right next to this aircraft is a retired EC-135 Airframe 60-0374. Delivered in 1961, the aircraft was used for a time as a Program Apollo rated instrumentation aircraft. This aircraft was re-engined in 1982 with the low bypass turbofans taken from retired 707 aircraft. This aircraft flew for a time with the 452nd Flight Test Squadron, a member of the 412th Operations Group, and was the last EC-135 built for the United States Air Force. Also at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, but no longer on display at the museum as they made room for a future C-5M Galaxy aircraft, is Airframe 55-3123. Initially, this aircraft started as a standard KC-135, but became a unique aircraft as for a time it carried the NKC-135 designation. This aircraft and two other KC-135s were heavily modified for electronics warfare testing and as a target aircraft the YAL-1 Laser Defense Program. This aircraft is currently on the tarmac at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base within view of the museum, but is no longer accessible to the general public. Our next stop on this trip to find all the displayed KC-135s takes us to the outdoor displayed aircraft at the Pima Air and Space Museum near Tucson, Arizona. The first aircraft you might come upon is Airframe 63-79er8. This aircraft started life out as a USAF KC-135. Our records show that for a time, this aircraft flew for the 917th Air Refueling Squadron out of Diaz Air Force Base in Texas. In 2004, this aircraft was transferred to NASA control and became one of 3 NASA C-135 aircraft that tested zero-G conditions on people and equipment. These aircraft were humorously known as Vomit Comets. On display at Pima, this aircraft still sports its NASA livery. Sitting not far from that aircraft is Airframe 63-8057. Built from delivery as an EC-135, this aircraft served for a time as an emergency night watch aircraft in case of nuclear war and as a member aircraft of Operation Blue Watch in 1974. The aircraft was retired to Pima in 1993. Our journey now takes us over to the Strategic Air Command and Aerospace Museum located near Ashland, Nebraska, just off of Offutt Air Force Base grounds. Airframe 63-8049er was delivered to the United States Air Force in 1964 and initially was a standard KC-135 refueling aircraft. By 1966, the aircraft had been converted into an EC-135 and from 1992 to 2023, the aircraft was displayed outdoors at the SAC Museum, but recently was moved indoors and is currently on display there without its wings. During its service time, this aircraft mostly served squadrons out of Offutt Air Force Base, but served in its capacity as an EC-135 in several other states as well, ending its career with the local Offutt Air Force Base 55th Strategic Reconnaissance Wing. Now we go see what lays on display in the state of California. At the March Airfield Air Museum, along with many other large aircraft such as bombers and others, we find that the KC-135, known as Airframe 55-3130. This was the 13th KC-135 delivered to the United States Air Force from Boeing, doing so in 1957. When this aircraft was retired to become part of this collection, it was known as Old Granddad. A few counties to the north, we find the former Castle Air Force Base and the Castle Air Force Museum. Outside of that museum sits Airframe 55-3139er, currently sandwiched in between a B-36 Peacemaker and an XB-47 Stratojet. This aircraft was delivered to the USAF in 1957 and still carries the original turbojets from when it was first produced. Outside of Edwards Air Force Base is the Air Force Flight Test Museum. Here we actually find two members of the KC-135 family on display. Airframe 60-0377 is the second of the two NC/NKC-135s in this video. This aircraft was delivered to the Air Force in 1961, where for most of its service life it was a standard C-135. However, during the development of the B-2 Spirit bomber, this aircraft was chosen to be equipped with the avionics, radar, and navigation systems of the upcoming bomber prior to being built. This aircraft flew over 300 sorties for that program before being retired. The other aircraft at this museum is Airframe 61-2669er, delivered in 1962 to the United States Air Force. Built as a standard C-135, the aircraft spent some time as a WC-135 Constant Phoenix, which was used as a particulate sample aircraft, which basically means it was used to detect airborne radioactive contamination from nuclear weapons tests that were conducted in the atmosphere in violation of the 1963 Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. We travel next to the state of Kansas to find a pair of KC-135 family members in two different museums. Outside of the Kansas Aviation Museum sits Airframe 56-3658, which was delivered in 1958 to the United States Air Force as a standard KC-135 Alpha. In 1984, it received 4 low-bypass engines taken from retired Boeing 707s. This aircraft served a majority of its service life with the 190th Air Refueling Wing as a member of the Kansas Air National Guard until it was retired to the museum. Our second airframe in Kansas is Airframe 57-1429er, which can be found at the Museum of the Kansas National Guard, which is just off the grounds of the Topeka Regional Airport. Although technically a museum piece, it also stands outside next to the access road to the airport, so it also could be considered a gate guard aircraft. The rest of our museum aircraft are the only KC-135 family aircraft on display in their state. Next, we travel to Barksdale Air Force Base outside of Shreveport, Louisiana, to find our next displayed KC-135 family member. This is Airframe 56-359er5, and it was delivered to the United States Air Force in 1957 and still to this day is engined with its original 4 turbojets. After it was withdrawn from service in 1994, it was put on permanent display at the Barksdale Global Power Museum. Unlike other museums on our list, this museum is on Air Force grounds, so you'll need to complete a visitor pass before visiting. These can be downloaded before your visit from their website. Back to the west we go to visit the Hill Aerospace Museum outside of Salt Lake City, Utah, on the northernmost end of the Hill Air Force Base. Airframe 57-1510 was delivered to the active duty component of the United States Air Force in 1958. Over the years, it was upgraded to the low bypass turbofans from 707s, and eventually would end its days with the Utah Air National Guard as a member of the 151st Air Refueling Wing. Up in South Dakota, specifically, we find the EC-135 Airframe 61-0262. This aircraft is located outside the South Dakota Air and Space Museum, located southeast of Ellsworth Air Force Base. This aircraft was retired in 1992, still supporting its original turbojets on its wings. In the Hoosier State, outside and northeast of the Grissom Joint Air Reserve Base, is another member of the EC-135 group. Airframe 61-0269er is a bit of an oddball, as it was designated as an EC-135L, since it was converted into an airborne command post in 1967. The aircraft was retired to the Grissom Air Museum in 1992 with the paint scheme at war during Operation Desert Storm. Airframe 61-0327 was delivered to the United States Air Force in 1961, originally as a C-135. It was soon converted into an EC-135 for use in the Apollo program as a ranged instrumentation aircraft. The aircraft went to work for Central Command, otherwise known as CENTCOM, which provides command and control of U.S. forces in the Middle East. There it would stay until retired in 2003, and then sent to the Museum of Aviation outside of Warner Robins Air Force Base in central Georgia for outdoor display. The last museum piece on this video today is at the Air Mobility Command Museum, just off the Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. Airframe 57-1507 is a KC-135 Alpha delivered to the U.S. Air Force in 1958. This aircraft flew for parts of its service life with the New Jersey Air National Guard before being retired to the Air Mobility Command Museum in 2009. Gate guards are aircraft that either by themselves or with other related aircraft are posted outside of facilities to show the public what kind of work goes on in that base. Some of these can be visited by the general public, others have their access controlled by military security forces. So please, before going to see one of these gate guard aircraft, make sure not to violate any base access rules. Scott Air Force Base is a rare case for a gate guard aircraft, as there are 3 aircraft that can be seen, but all under different circumstances. Airframe 56-3611 is the one true gate guard aircraft on the Scott Air Force Base list. It is located near the main gate of the Air Force Base and is accessible by the general public by a parking lot that is outside the fence line of the Air Force Base. This aircraft was delivered in 1957 and it got a low bypass engine upgrade in 1984. Its date of retirement is not known, but it was put on display at the Scott Field Heritage Air Park in 2009, where it stands today with several other aircraft. The second aircraft on the list is found well inside Scott Air Force Base and only qualifies as a gate guard since it's not a museum piece either. Airframe 59-1487 was delivered to the United States Air Force in 1960, and while in service, flew for the 126th Air Refueling Wing of the Illinois National Air Guard until 2011, when it was retired. Instead of being installed as a gate guard, it stands near the middle of the main part of the base, just off the flight line of the 126th Air Refueling Wing. Aircraft number 3 at Scott Air Force Base is not a gate guard, nor does it seem to be a museum piece. Airframe 63-8010, delivered in 1963, is currently on the far northern flight line of the base, otherwise known as Mid-America St. Louis Airport, near Boeing's offices, and can be seen from Interstate 64 as you pass by. We have no knowledge of what is to become of this aircraft in the near future. We find ourselves back at McConnell Air Force Base, where earlier in the video we reviewed the history of a KC-135 that sits as a museum piece at the Kansas Aviation Museum. We now find Airframe 553118 that is the oldest preserved member of the C-135 family. It, along with the B-47 Stratojet and an F-105 Thunderchief, are all gate guards at the main gate of McConnell Air Force Base. This aircraft was delivered to the United States Air Force in 1956 and is named the City of Renton, where this aircraft was manufactured. Now we travel to Abilene, Texas, and the Dyess Air Force Base to find our next gate guard aircraft. Airframe 56-3639er was delivered to the United States Air Force in 1958 and served 3.5 decades before being retired to Dyess Air Force Base. It should be noticed that this gate guard and its companion aircraft are located inside the Dyess Air Force Base, and you will need to gain access via the co-located Visitor Control Center to see this and the other aircraft. Airframe 57-1458 is the furthest north displayed aircraft, gate guard, or museum piece, as it is located within the grounds of Eielson Air Force Base near Fairbanks, Alaska. Delivered in 1958, this aircraft has been converted into a KC-135E, which means it was switched from turbojets to the low bypass turbofans from the 1980s. This aircraft went on display in 1997. Outside Portsmouth, New Hampshire, you will find what used to be Pease Air Force Base, but which is now known as Pease International Airport. Airframe 57-1455 is located across the street from the New Hampshire National Air Guard Recruiting Office just off airport grounds. This aircraft was delivered to the United States Air Force in 1958 and was converted to the turbofan-powered KC-135E model in 1982. Whether this one is standing gate guard or not is debatable, since it is 1. Not located with the other gate guard aircraft that are outside the flight line, and 2. On a patch of tarmac inside the flight line. However, airframe 57-14905, located on the Nebraska Air National Guard base outside of Lincoln, Nebraska, is listed as a preserved aircraft. This aircraft retired in 2009, since being delivered to the United States Air Force in 1958. Southern Oklahoma is the site of our next gate guard aircraft. Airframe 580070 is co-located with the Lockheed C-141 Bravo Starlifter. These two aircraft are located outside of Altus Air Force Base. This aircraft is in its KC-135 Alpha configuration, even though it was re-engined with low bypass turbofans during its service period. The aircraft served in the United States Air Force from 1958 to 2009. The second vomit comment on our overall list for this video is currently standing gate guard outside the Lone Star Flight Museum, but it's not part of its collection. Airframe 59-1481 was delivered as a KC-135 Alpha to the United States Air Force in 1960. The aircraft was provided to the Federal Aviation Administration for route proving for other aircraft. Then it went on to NASA to become one of their 3 0G experience aircraft. As a note, most of the weightless scenes inside Apollo 13 were filmed inside this aircraft. NASA retired this aircraft sometime after 1995. Airframe 59-14907 is located next to a traffic circle on the grounds of McGuire Air Force Base. Other aircraft at this traffic circle are a Lockheed C-141 Bravo Starlifter and a McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II. There is no info on when this KC-135 was acquired by the United States Air Force, nor when it was retired. At the Zorinsky Memorial Airpark just inside the fence line of Offutt Air Force Base in eastern Nebraska, you can find a Boeing B-52 Stratofortress and an EC-135 Alpha with the airframe number of 61-0287. While looking like they may be publicly accessible, these two planes are in fact behind a security fence near the Kinney Gate of the base. This EC-135 was delivered to the United States Air Force in 1962 and flew as an airborne command post for most of its career, until retired in 1992. Along with several other aircraft located with it, a C-135 family member with the airframe number of 61-2671 are all gate guards just inside the fence line of Tinker Air Force Base. It is located between the base commissary, aka the base grocery store, and Interstate 40 going through Oklahoma City. Delivered in 1961, this aircraft was then retired in 1991 to its present location. Last but not least is the KC-135 with the airframe number 63-8005. This aircraft is posted as a gate guard aircraft at Grand Forks Air Force Base in North Dakota. This aircraft and the other aircraft and relative equipment are located outside the fence line next to the Visitor Control Center at the base's main entrance. This aircraft was delivered to the United States Air Force in 1963 and was retired to its current location in 1994. As you can see, the KC-135 and its derivatives are still very much part of our world today. They continue to serve in military and civilian roles, and they are also popular attractions at museums and air shows around the globe. So the next time you're traveling, keep an eye out for one of these amazing aircraft. You might be surprised where you find it. Thank you for watching our story on where you can find members of the KC-135 family. Our next displayed aircraft video will be the final chapter in the Boeing 707 and its family member series, as we cover the locations of the remaining C-137s in the world. Click one of the following links to find where you can watch a video on where to find a preserved Boeing 720, or you can watch any number of videos that cover the range of full-length 707 histories. You can subscribe to this channel and continue watching more aviation content, and you can also support our channel financially through our Patreon page, which is available on this screen. Thank you so very much for watching our channel, and we all hope to see you again.